Hi, my name is Micah. I live in Tennessee. It's raining right now, but I made this movie. It was a micro-budget feature. By micro-budget, I mean under 10,000 max. I made it over the course of a year, from conception to completion, not counting the festivals, and then ultimately getting it onto streaming with Amazon Prime. We shot in the summer of 2018 over the course of about 15 days total. I never had any intention of selling the movie or trying to get it distributed. I just wanted to A, just make it, and B, have it as sort of a resume piece. So in the beginning, when I was planning out production, I went on YouTube and on Google and was just looking up other people who had made micro-budget feature films specifically, and couldn't really find that many. And the ones that I did find, they really didn't like their films. I wanted to do this because I actually like the movie that we ended up making. It's not near perfect, far from, but I'm still really proud of it. It seems like a lot of the micro-budget indie movies and short films too that I was seeing from other filmmakers were too big for their britches. They were bank robberies and time travel and sci-fi and even horror to an extent. Like, that stuff is hard. A lot harder than a drama, a lot harder technically, I mean, than a character-driven piece, and those things are difficult to pull off, but they're difficult in the writing, conception, and then on the part of the performers, so the cast and directing. But if you know what you're doing, and if you have good people, talented people involved, then dramas, character pieces, even comedies, maybe possibly, those things end up being better suited to indie and micro-budget film, just because they're so much less technically challenging. They require so much less money. So I would say do something dramatic, do something character-driven, but not too dramatic. My film was a little too dramatic, I would say. Not that it didn't work, not that my actors didn't pull it off, because they did, which is credit to them and not to me. Because 2 years later, now, I wouldn't dream of trying to make something as dramatic or dealing with as maybe dark of some elements as this was. And it was on purpose, and I do feel like I am glad that we went to the places that we did, which I'll talk about, and you can see, if you'd like, it is on Amazon. It's on Amazon Prime, free on Prime. But kind of tacking on to that, as it relates specifically to indie and micro-budget film, I think it's really important to discern and utilize what is specific to your world. What locations do you have access to? What interesting people do you have access to? What interesting props or vehicles or buildings do you have access to? For example, I had access to an old RV. I had access to multiple retro 60s time capsule houses. I had access to a very large family farm with a gigantic farmhouse and a huge barn and stuff like that. And so I had access to all of those things, and I said, okay, these are all really interesting things. How can I work them into my script? That is how you will make something, at the very least, original. Whether or not it ends up being good, whether or not it ends up being technically pristine, you still made something original, and it was original because it was composed entirely of elements that only you have access to. Casting is really, really key, and if you have a good script, that will attract good actors. Good actors can make a bad script good, but you have to wrangle those good actors in first. You have to involve them, whether that's by paying them a lot. But if you have a good script, that will attract good actors. And the actors that I had for my movie were way too good for me, and I didn't even realize how experienced some of them were. And that's what you want. You want people who want to be in your film, not just because they owe you a favor, but because they like it. They like the character, they like the story, they're going to invest themselves into it, and that's what's going to give you a really solid performance. As far as crew goes, that's always going to be the most challenging part about making an independent film or a micro-budget film, specifically if you can't pay all of them. I probably had about a dozen people circulating in and out, so only ever 3 or 4, sometimes less than that. I think it's really important to have a committed main actor. Whoever your star is, whoever the person you're spending the most time with is, they need to be the most committed. I had a super committed, super incredible main actor And it just wouldn't be possible without that person. But I think an optimal skeleton crew would be an AC, and then 1 or 2 sound people, a grip / script supervisor, if you can't get both, a grip / script supervisor, and then possibly a producer / second AD or AD. Even if it's an off-site producer, it'll still be helpful. Someone specifically to manage food and catering. I didn't do that. Well, I kind of did, but not really, and that would have saved me a lot of time and stress. I think the director should be behind the camera. Maybe it's because I'm a control freak and that's my own problem, but I don't really see how a director cannot be behind the camera if you are the one with the vision truly. Like if you wrote the script in particular, I don't know how you could not stand it. So along those lines of having a vision, storyboarding, I think a shot list can only get you so far. But if you have it all drawn out or in addition to written down, maybe it just helps the flow, because then everyone else around you can see what you want to. So no one has to be in the dark. Like they know exactly, he wants the camera here, I can go ahead and put it there. You're a safe. And then when it comes to, cinematography, if you're making a micro-budget movie, pattern it off of a good micro-budget movie, which they do exist. I remember when I was storyboarding and making my shot list, the 2 movies that were really sticking out to me were, because at the time, Neon Demon and You Were Never Really Here. I saw You Were Never Really Here when it came out, like 2 days before we started filming, and I was like, oh wow, okay, great. And it did still end up heavily influencing my cinematography even at that super late stage. I don't really have to say this, I'm sure, but I'll say it anyway just briefly. Don't underestimate score and sound. I never underestimate score, but I do underestimate sound. I like things to be really simplistic and minimalistic, but sometimes to a fault. I shot on a C100, which I owned. I had rented Zeiss lenses. Nothing, fancy. I kind of have picked up that it's a lot more about the lens than the camera body. Camera bodies are significantly less expensive than the lenses are. So it's not so much the camera, it's more knowing what to do with the camera and having a legitimately good lens on your camera. For lighting, I really, really like China balls. I've never done harsh lighting or really harsh contrast. I like soft lighting, I like mood lighting. I like people's skin to be smooth, and eye light, firm believer in the eye light. There's always eye light in my movie, even in places where it doesn't make any sense. That whole strategy totally backfired in my opening scene, which I hate. The opposite of what usually happens in low budget film happened to me. I overlit. Well, okay, so the scene is supposed to be at nighttime, like pitch black nighttime, inside, and I overlit, thinking, I will darken it in post. And then the compression of the movie just crunched the blacks, or the dark tones just got crushed. And then every time I exported it or uploaded it or just anything, that entire scene is just so blocky, it's so compressed, and I'm not over it, and I'm not going to get over it. So if you look at any of the art or the trailer or just anything from the movie, you'll immediately see my projector screen. I had a gigantic 30-foot projector screen that I used for a lot of this. For driving scenes, kind of like a retro, classic Hollywood driving scenes kind of thing. And we used a projector screen for a lot of fantasy sequences and a couple other things. And it's not entirely random. It does play into the story in that the main character is schizophrenic and he idealizes often. And so the usage of the screen is to point out that, hey, there is a somewhat fantastical, for lack of a better term, divide between reality and what this character's reality is. You may just have to watch the trailer or watch the movie and you'll understand. The movie is 90 minutes, so it's an hour and a half. I actually cut it down 15 minutes after showing my first cut. I'm a big fan of musical sequences, not like, singing and dancing, but musical sequences. They don't have audio, they just have music, they just have a song. There are a couple songs like in the movie, written for the movie. I also like long dramatic looks, like, people introspectively staring at themselves in mirrors. I just think that's a lot of fun. It can definitely not work. I'm not saying that it works all the time for me, but that's actually why I cut 15 minutes out. If you can fathom it, it's pretty much 15 minutes of silence. Festivals. I don't know how I feel about festivals, even though for an indie film, I mean, we did have relative success. I think I ended up getting into 7 or 8, and then had like 2 runner-ups or semi-finalists. This wasn't like Sundance and stuff. A couple of them were online festivals. The film festival process is a little shady. It's a little scammy. It's a little political. Probably submitted to maybe like 30. And I think that the price tag on that ended up being maybe between $400 and $600 of entry fees. It wasn't crazy. It's also not great. And then getting it onto Amazon was technically not too tricky. The only real holdup there was that they require you to have subtitles and closed captions. They list a bunch of services that you can pay for. And I was pretty much done paying for anything related to this movie. And so I found out that you can actually use YouTube's subtitle editor. You can go in and manually put in all your subtitles, and then you can download that file. And you can, if you just download it automatically, it'll download it into SBV, which isn't the one you need. You need an SRT. Within the subtitle editor itself, there's a drop-down menu that you can choose which format to download it in. And I downloaded that SRT file and it worked. I was really shocked. I was 95% sure that Amazon wouldn't accept it, but they totally did. So yeah, I definitely say watch it, and then I'm sure that there are a ton of things that I didn't address in this that maybe I should have. Ask questions, share with me stuff that you've made. I just really like watching other people's stuff, what they're being able to accomplish like practically as micro-budget filmmakers, and this movie really did accomplish a lot. I mean, the amount of locations that we had in the time that we had. It was a small cast, but still not that small. It was like 11 person cast, but they were spread out. So it wasn't like there were ever 11 people in a room, which would be really hard, but they were spread out. So I think that actually serves the film well in that you kind of have this constant new sprinkling in of characters, which, your screenwriting professor may be like, yeah, you can't do that. You have to introduce everyone the first 10 minutes. And I think that that's boring. So the main characters are introduced, but then there are a bunch of supporting roles, but they're all really important, and they all serve very specific purposes to the main characters. Yeah, it's just a good time. For as dramatic as it gets, I think it's also really fun, and I tried to sprinkle some fun, bizarre things in there just to remind us that, like, hey, it's just a movie. We did this because we like to do it. We're just having fun. At the same time, it can still be meaningful and have a purpose. And the movie's about a schizophrenic father who takes his daughter on a road trip. That's the easy pitch. It's about a lot more than that. There's definitely that element of mental illness, that discussion, and I wanted to discuss that in not lighthearted is the wrong word, not lighthearted, but I wanted to discuss a typically heavy and typically dark theme, but I wanted to discuss it with color. If that makes any sense. I want to write a film involving mental illness and not feature a single scene in a therapist's office. Just not buy into any of the cliches associated with mental illness. And also point out that, hey, even though this character, the main character, has these inhibitors and has this backstory contributing to these inhibitors, which I'm not going to spoil it. It's pretty twisty, but that doesn't mean that he doesn't really love his daughter, which is the whole point. It's about a dad's love for his kid. Even if he doesn't know how to show it, even if he fails more than he succeeds, it does not mean that he does not love her. It doesn't mean that she can't love him too. There's a lot of color and a lot of lens flares, and it's just a good time. We've got some fog, and we have some lamps that are blue light for no real reason, and it's just a lot of fun. So go watch it. Here to Mars. I'm Micah. Ask me anything. And kind of all over the place, but it's just the way we do things. Bye.